new faces, regular faces, faces of all shapes and sizes, smiles all round. Welcome. First of all, I think it would be prudent and sensible to say thank you to the kind folks and companies that make this event happen. So, our thanks and round of applause, please. Code Weavers, Vessels Value, Data FlexNet, My Clever Group, and last but certainly not least, Canuka Digital. We have two fantastic speakers this evening, and I'm sure you've all looked online and seen what's to come. But for those who are new and don't perhaps know what we do, you're going to get two talks, very interesting. You'll have an opportunity to ask some brief questions. After those talks, we're going to have a break. We'll move back into the gathering area outside where there'll still be food and drink for you to enjoy. There'll also be a preparatory exercise for the final event of the evening, which is the open discussion. So, great value for money. That's two great talks, a break, more drink, and an open discussion. A little word about the open discussion. It's driven by you, the participants. So, there'll be an opportunity for you to put ideas out there on the board. You put your ideas down, you can then put a mark against those and vote for the ones that you're interested in. We'll gather those up at the end of the break and put them into some sort of popular order, and we go through them 3 minutes at a time. And after 3 minutes, you get to vote whether you want another 3 minutes or you move on to the next topic. Everyone gets an opportunity to talk. Everyone gets an opportunity to say something. It's a great time for us to explore some topics that are hot at the moment in the worlds of web development. If anybody's got any questions about that, I'll have a brief reminder and you can come and ask me again after the talks. Okay, so I think, unless there's any housekeeping, do we have any new rules or health and safety things, fire alarms, tests?
I don't know. No planned fire alarms.
No planned fire alarms. So if you hear an alarm, be alarmed. It's an unexpected alarm. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to welcome our very own, all of the time, Greg, to come and talk to us.
How about now? Yeah, cool.
That's the only apology you're getting.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can definitely flick a switch. So there we go. Right, hello everyone. Thank you all for coming. I'm sure most of you know who I am, but for those who don't, I'm Greg, and I work at Vessels Value. The thing I'm talking to you tonight about isn't something that's part of my day job, but it is something that I've been interested in for quite a while. And it's an exciting new proposal called the WebAssembly interface types. To begin with, I will introduce WebAssembly because some people you might be like, well, I don't even know what that is. So, okay. All right, so what is WebAssembly? So it's an open standard assembly-like language developed by the World Wide Web Consortium. You might know them as W3C. It was primarily designed for web pages to be run within a browser, but I think people looked at it and thought, well, we could do more with this. So it's not something that you tend to write by hand. You can, but you're probably a sadist if you do. So instead, it's more of a compilation target for what's primarily at the moment lower level languages, C, C++, Rust. There is definitely a plan to target high level languages, but it's a bit more complicated because of garbage collection and dealing with sort of complex objects. So pretty much every modern JavaScript engine and browsers now supports WebAssembly. It's probably not something that you see a lot because, well, probably Internet Explorer stopping people from actually doing it. All right, so you now sort of know what WebAssembly is, but what are the benefits of it? So I'd say the most important benefit to begin with is speed. You can write in very low-level languages and leverage that speed in your applications. It's always going to be faster than the equivalent implementation in JavaScript. Reuse. So I mean, when you think about it just in a browser context, you don't really, I guess it's not that apparent, but as I said before, people are looking at executing it on more platforms, and that's when you could reuse code. So you could write something in C++, use it in PHP, Ruby, browser, everything. Sandboxing. So it can only access what you allocate it. So that's, if you were to use this in another low-level language, that is another benefit as well. There is that built-in sandboxing. So the WASM files that WebAssembly generates when you compile stuff are completely portable. So you could have it as a part of your build server. You don't need extensions installed on all of your servers like you might do with PHP if you're doing the sort of C-based extensions. So nothing's perfect. There are downsides of WebAssembly. So I think it's important to note with a lot of these downsides is that WebAssembly is a work in progress. There's a lot of proposals going around. Not all of them are finalized, not all of them are finished. So I mean, this exception one is a big deal at the moment, but there is a proposal to deal with it. But yeah, at the moment you do have to just kind of rethrow exceptions in the embedding language, which for most people is going to be JavaScript. The value types, they're limited to numerical types. So it's 32-bit and 64-bit integers and floats. Internally, it uses 8 and 16-bit ones for storing integers. You'll see why this can be a bit of a problem. So you might have heard the term glue code before. It's something that's used in a lot of contexts. So basically, you would write glue code on both ends to sort of facilitate the transfer of data because things look at values and objects differently. So here's something I wrote earlier. And it's a very simple program written in C compiled to WebAssembly. And you can see that it's basically a string. You don't need to worry too much about the syntax in it. And it's returning that. And this is about the most optimized JavaScript you can write for it. It's using all the cutting edge tools and classes. Like, I think that text decoder class came out a couple of months ago. It's that new. So what it will do is, you would expect that to just be a string. It's returning hello stats web meetup. Great. If you were to try and console log that, you would not get what you'd expect. You get an int. So what you then have to do is access the part in linear memory. You then have to turn it into an array of bytes, which is what that uint8 array is. And then you have to use a text decoder on it. If you didn't have access to the text decoder, you then have to loop and convert all the ints into chars. And that's not very nice. Like, that's not what I would expect from something that's supposed to be promoting interoperability. So is there a way we can make this easier? Well, yes. There's tooling out there which does solve a lot of the problems. So for example, some of you might have heard of Nscripten before. It's used for sort of facilitating high-level communication between C, C++, and JavaScript. Rust has something similar with WASM bindgen. So as I said, when I say high-level interactions, I mean in terms of types. So things, when you return a string, you're working with a string, which is what you'd expect. And also, both of these, they primarily start with JavaScript, so they will make them behave like an ECMAScript module. So with the sort of export default, and then you can import it. So whilst this is better, it's doing the work for you, it's still creating glue code, which I'm sure people could start to realize the problems with that. You're basically disassembling and reassembling stuff on both sides. Like, why can't a string just be a string? So there's the AnyRef type proposal in WebAssembly, which basically what it allows for is just having a pointer on both sides, and it will just copy it across. WebAssembly doesn't need to know what it does. It just knows, I'm going to pass this to JavaScript, and that can deal with it. But that's only going to work for very simple cases because a lot of the time WebAssembly will need to work with the type. It'll need to perform operations on it. So here's something I wrote in Rust. It's a very simple thing, which takes a string, uses string interpolation, and basically it will do hello, whatever the name that you pass in. So if you were to call it from a node context and you gave it JavaScript, it would say hello JavaScript. I mean, this is a lot better. Like, obviously you can't quite see the execution, but that's what you would be able to console log. You wouldn't need to do the text decoder or anything like that. You are getting a string, but you know underneath that everything's being disassembled and reassembled, which isn't particularly performant. It's also error prone because why does it need to do the hard work? You know what it needs to be. So this whole situation is something that browsers probably went through quite a while ago in terms of web APIs and JavaScript. So what did they come up with to solve this problem, which is interface description languages? So it's basically like writing out a series of interfaces which aren't specific to a certain language. So if we were to use Chrome as an example, you've got a browser rendering engine called Blink, and you've got a JavaScript engine called V8. So you could create these IDL files, and then it's up to V8 to implement them in JavaScript. Well, I say in JavaScript, but it'll be written in C++, and then you call it through it. So you probably use web APIs all the time. If you do stuff like document query selector, anything like that, you are working with web APIs. So document is actually an interface, and it's then implemented in C++. So a lot of it is fairly simple. For example, you may have seen a thing called DOM strings before. If you've ever been on like MDN and looked at the documentation, that is a web API type, but they map seamlessly with JavaScript strings because they're both UTF-16 strings. But obviously, I'm sure you can imagine a lot of the mappings aren't so straightforward when you start getting into objects and types. But how can we use this in the context of WebAssembly? Well, someone's already, well, I say someone, some people have already started on this, and they've made a proposal called WebAssembly interface types. And this is a very crude diagram that I cooked up, which basically shows that it sits as an intermediary representation. So you've got all the different possible compilation targets. I mean, there'll be lots more in the future. But, I mean, these are your two common ones. I have seen people do stuff in Go. I don't think Java's quite there yet, but I imagine it will be. And then you could use it within the context of PHP, Python, Node, Ruby, other WebAssembly modules, anything. So what are WebAssembly interface types? So you might think, okay, we can just create some mappings like there would be if we were doing it in like a web API context. Unfortunately, it's not quite that simple. So the example we had before of the string, you saw that the inner representation was an array of bytes. Well, that's not always the case. If we start doing stuff in C#, Java, or anything like that, they're garbage collected objects. They won't actually be an array of bytes. So we can't hard code mappings because it may be that the compilation language that you're using doesn't represent strings in the same way. So, and another problem that you have at the moment is, well, what if you want WebAssembly to communicate with web APIs directly? Because at the moment it has to use JavaScript as a middleman, which is, as you can tell, pretty inefficient. Because again, it's doing a lot of disassembling, reassembling, so then JavaScript can pass it, disassembling the result, and then passing it back. So what if you could have WebAssembly, what if you could have WebAssembly interface types to web API mappings? I mean, that would solve some of the issues, but then you've got to deal with the host language as well. So browsers, for example, could bake in the JavaScript or WebAssembly interface types, and that's something that WebAssembly wouldn't have to pass. It's already baked in. But then it would be up to the WebAssembly module to basically provide a guidebook of like, hey, here are all the types within this. This is how you can use them. This is how you assemble them. because it may be that even the same module might represent strings in two different ways. If it's just passing a DOM string around that it was given from JavaScript, that's going to be different than if you'd written in C and your string's an array of bytes. So here is another example. It's the same Hello World WASM module that I made before, but instead we're using it in Python using the WASM WebAssembly runtime. And obviously, in this example, it's not too easy to tell, but internally there is no glue code in this. It's all using WebAssembly interface types. So at the moment, if you want to compile something to use it, you do have to specify a flag when you're compiling into WebAssembly. But it means that this is a lot more performant. It's a lot less error prone because you're not disassembling things. A string is actually just a string. And this is such a broad topic that I could literally speak about for hours, but I don't think that would fly. So I just scratched the surface, and I think really just want people to make people aware of it so you can look into it yourself. I mean, you'll find lots of people blogging about it online. Not everyone's so optimistic about it. Some people think it's too much, and other people have tried to do this sort of like globally uniting language, and then we'll just end up with even more standards. But I think whilst it's idealistic, I think it's a really good idea, and I think it could actually take off. I'm happy to, obviously it's not much use posting links here, but I'm happy to post them on the Meetup group. The Mozilla Hacks blog about WebAssembly interface types will explain this probably better than I ever could. It's quite a long read. It's got a couple of videos, some great diagrams. I'd really recommend everyone checking it out. And you can also see the interface types proposal on GitHub. And again, that's a very long read. Has anyone got any questions? Yep.
What kind of workflow do these things go into? I'm just finding them, I've never used it. I find it hard to imagine.
Okay,
it's
so.
Like, oh yeah, this is a great thing for WebAssembly. And then how does it?
Okay, so one thing you could do is you would write a program in C++, you'd have a repository of it in, and then for your build server for your application that's going to consume the WebAssembly, you would have a WebAssembly compiler on the build server, you'd pull down that repo, compile it, and then you could use it within your project. So it doesn't, I think if you've already got a build server in place, it's probably not that much more of a workflow. Obviously, like I said, a lot of this stuff is experimental. I don't think PHP, for example, has particularly good engine for running WebAssembly. I'm not sure the one that is, I don't think it supports interface types. But if you were to give it another couple of years, I think it would just be a case of you build your module and then you load it in. So, yep.
Can I just pass you a microphone?
So you mentioned the main advantage of this is speed.
Yeah.
But when you have to use glue code, what is the actual benchmark of it? So reassembling it all together, doesn't it get back to the same sort of benchmark?
The reassembling isn't too bad. It sounds worse than it is. A lot of this conversion is incredibly quick, and it's optimized by a compiler and stuff like that, but it's still just unnecessary, and it does mean that it's a lot more work for the tools like Inscripton and WASM bindgen. And even if you do everything perfectly in there, you still sometimes on your Rust or your C++ have to do a bit of code to allow for weird edge cases, but it is still a lot quicker. Obviously, it's going to be hard to make proper benchmarks and stuff like this, because I find a lot of benchmarks are far too simplistic. It's things that no one would ever really write, that just loops over pointless data and stuff. Really, it's a bit too early to tell, but like you could work with WebAssembly and do some stuff that might be quite mathematically heavy, because some of the higher level languages don't particularly optimize it very well. Unfortunately, I haven't found any good benchmarks to show. I would have liked to. But. Yep.
What are the typical use cases of WebAssembly actually on the web?
Yeah.
Like what are the typical use cases?
They tend to be graphical stuff. It's not something I've worked with a lot. If I'm honest, I'm not too interested in using it in a browser perspective. That's not the kind of stuff that I tend to work with, but most of the running cases of WebAssembly are graphically heavy sort of web applications. And that is apparently where it blows JavaScript out of the water in terms of speed. I'm sure there's probably applications out there that you can see in WebAssembly, and you'll see performance that you haven't quite seen before in terms of web applications. Yeah.
Just to help with answering that, the Squoosh app, I think the website is squoosh.app, made by Google, which is a progressive web app for converting image files into different formats, for reducing file size. They used WebAssembly for doing for converting between the different formats, because the libraries in other languages were much more available and better and faster.
Yeah.
And I think they also use it for doing actually rotating the images and stuff.
Yeah.
And the guys that built it have got a couple of really great YouTube videos describing how they actually did it and what the use case were and what the advantages were. So that's a really good starting point for getting into it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, if you find an existing library in a low-level language and there's nothing in a higher one, you could compile it to WebAssembly. I did have a goal with taking a facial recognition library in Rust and compiling it. I did get most of it to work in JavaScript, so that would be a cool thing. Well, cool/terrifying, depending on your perspective. But you could actually just leverage some very low-level library in your browser and have facial recognition in just a standard website. And I imagine trying to write that in JavaScript would be an absolute nightmare, and it'd be incredibly slow.
I noticed you said there was a PHP, a way of using WASM modules in PHP directly as well. Recent versions of PHP have FFI built in. I'd assume FFI would be far more performant because it's directly accessing.
It's also quite limited, though. It's primarily meant for working with C. So you tend to like pass it .so, or you pass it headers and stuff like that. It's a very different use case. I did look into FFI, and it's quite limited. It means you could use like structs that you define in C, but in terms of taking an existing program and being like, I want to run this in PHP, it's not really like that. It's hard to find a lot about FFI in terms of real examples. I couldn't find any application that people are actually using it. So it could be that I'm wrong on that. I'm happy to admit it, but it didn't look as if it covered nearly as many bases. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, cool.
All right, can we have a big round of applause, please, for Greg? Thank you.
Need to switch over.
And next up, we've got Andy. Where's Andy?
He's just left. He legged it about 30 seconds ago.
Okay. That's fine.
I assume he's had like nerves and he's just popped to the loo or something.
Okay, well, that
Ad-lib.
opportune time for me to make some announcements. Well, more of a message. Firstly, I wanted to stress the importance of responding and replying if you're planning to attend on Meetup. My understanding tonight is that we've had 34 responses to say attendance was happening and 43 attendees. The responses on Meetup are used to provide the food and the drink and to cater and to take care of everybody while you're here. So if you respond on Meetup, that certainly helps the organisers to make sure that you're properly catered for while you're here. It helps us, and it gives you a better experience too. So please, I implore you, respond on meetup.com whenever the meetup is announced. It certainly helps in the way. Also, just checking my notes, Staff's Web Meetup is also on the search for speakers. There are openings in the space from June and through till the end of the year. So if you have a sudden urge to wish to share your knowledge or experience with this fine body of people that you see before you, now might be the time to have a go. Whether you're an experienced speaker or someone's new, you might be cutting your teeth. You might want to wow us with your vast experience. Anything is welcome, and I'm sure if you would like to speak, if you just get in touch with us, me, George, Tash, Phil, let any of us know and we'll get you into the right place to make sure it's penciled in. It's a great place to speak and to talk and to share. It's a friendly crowd. It's great. And without further ado, from one... Oh, no problem. I was... How to segue between WASM and cats. They're both a bit cantankerous. Play in a sandbox. Nice. Far-fetched. Are you ready? You need a... It's cats, isn't it? I must say, I'm intrigued at this talk. It's got the most provocative title in some time, although timely with the Netflix show, where you don't mess with cats. It is good. I can't use the actual title because I don't know what rating our YouTube channel has.
I've marked it as not for children.
Well, that's just as well. Just like cats. I thought we might fill that brief moment with some silence. Just by way of show of hands, is anybody interested in talking? Not now. But between June and the end of the year, there are opportunities to speak. Is anybody actually interested? Ooh, here we go. Raise those hands like you mean it. Up in the air. Don't let them escape. See Tash after break. It's like school.
I thought you were going to say, raise your hands if you didn't RSVP.
That's next. We haven't got any technical folks here. Oh, no, you want me to ask? Just while we engage with the technical difficulty, we'll give you 1 minute. Just while we're giving them 1 minute, just what kind of topics do you think Staff's Web Meetup, as you are currently the representation of the group, what are you interested in hearing about? What would you like to hear a talk on? Even if you don't think you want to speak, what would you like to hear? Just say things. Code automation. Any others? I like that. Pardon? Brexit. Yes, we'll do. I don't think we've done enough Brexit at Staff's Web Meetup. How Brexit might affect our industry. You know what, actually, I wouldn't mind that. Which, speaking of being a sadist, I might not mind that at all. Any others? So we've got code automation and Brexit. A software Brexit.
Could you, in case anyone's watching, could you just let them know we're not going to be able to stream the next...
If anybody in the internet's out there watching, I'd like to apologize to the 2 people that are watching. I'd like to apologize as we're going to be unable to stream the next talk. Will they be able to hear?
I'm just going to kill the stream.
We're not even going to try. Just so you're clear, if you're listening out there, the 2 of you, we are sorry, but the web is letting us down. We're only talking about the web. We're not going to use it. So, without further ado, for everyone